Well, we do bring greetings of love in the precious name of Christ this morning, and certainly it is good to be here and to be able to share together with you all. First of all, I take this opportunity to thank you for your love gifts over the years. It's been a real blessing, but it's very humbling as we think about God's people sharing together and the privilege it is for us to serve. Privilege to serve in the ministry, privilege to interact in people's lives has been a tremendous blessing, and I thank the Lord for that. As I was pondering a message this morning, this message actually my wife suggested, Barb suggested. She said she's been blessed with this study in the book of Esther, and so I had some jobs that were a little far away this past week, and I don't know how many times I listened to the book of Esther, and so we're not going to be able to cover the whole thing, and you might have some thoughts out of the book of Esther that really encourage you as well that maybe aren't brought out in detail, but I trust the Spirit of God to take His word and to minister to our hearts here this morning. So I do invite your attention to the book of Esther. And there's one overarching thing that comes out of this book as well that I've entitled the message, The Amazing Providence of God. The Amazing Providence of God. Someone has said that providence is that continuous agency of God by which He makes all events of the physical and moral world fulfill the original design which He hath created it. As I ponder that thought, that God, His providence, is the continuous agency of God. He brings all things in. Isn't that an amazing thought? And can we wrap our minds around that? That things in this world don't just happen. God is in control. God is sovereignly in control. It's easy to forget that sometimes when it comes down to our daily experiences in life, especially when we get frustrated. What do we realize? That God is in control. Providence has also been defined as the hand of God in the glove of history. Looking ahead, we look ahead with confidence that God is faithful and His providence will continue on. When we look in behind, in reverse, we see that God was there. And God has a bigger plan that we don't often see, or we don't have the ability, the capability to see out ahead like God does. But we look back and think, wow, that was God. And it can be in the little things of life that we go through. That was God. God was there. God protected. God orchestrated. Things didn't just happen. Three great facts that make up the sovereignty of God as witnessed by man. I like this thought here. The first of these basic or great facts is creation, which accounts for the existence of this universe. God in His sovereignty created everything. Each one of us, all the universe, the visible and invisible, we have no way to comprehend this. Here we are, so small, so insignificant. Yet God created all of us. In Genesis 1:1 says, in the beginning, God created the world. So number one, the creation of God. Number two, in His sovereignty, is the preservation. The preservation of God, which accounts for the continuation of the universe. It's because of God's sovereignty that this universe continues. We are so helpless. We are so helpless. This world is spinning, the earth is spinning, everything's rotating at the exact perfect thing. It's God. And I'd just like to pull up Hebrews chapter 1 on this, or actually Colossians 1. We'll look at that one. Colossians 1:16 and 17, it says, for by Him were all things created that are in heaven and that are in earth, visible and invisible, whether they be thrones or dominions or principalities or powers, all things were created by Him and for Him. and he is before all things, and by him all things consist. So he created, he preserves, and the third one here is providence, that which accounts for the progress and development of this universe. Again, I'm just going to pull a few verses out. Psalm 135. Psalm 135, verses 6 to 10. Read like this. Whosoever the Lord pleased, or whatsoever the Lord pleased, that did he in heaven and in earth, in the seas and all the deep places. So whatever God pleased, he does. He causes the vapors to ascend from the ends of the earth. He maketh lightnings for the rain. He bringeth the wind out of his treasuries. Who smote the firstborn of Egypt, both man and beast. Who sent tokens and wonders in the midst of thee, O Egypt, upon Pharaoh and upon all his servants. Who smote the great nations and slew mighty kings. So God does whatever he pleases, whatever he chooses, and that is his providence. And also in Daniel chapter 4, some interesting verses after Nebuchadnezzar returns to his senses after he was out in the meadow, in the field for 7 years. Deuteronomy 4, 34 and 35, he says, at the end of the days that I, Nebuchadnezzar, lifted up mine eyes unto heaven, and my understanding returned unto me, and I blessed the Most High, and I praised and honored him that liveth forever, whose dominion is an everlasting dominion, and his kingdom is from generation to generation, and all the inhabitants of the earth are reputed as nothing, for he doeth according to his will in the army of heaven and among the inhabitants of the earth, and none can stay his hand, or who can say, what doest thou? That is our God. That is the sovereignty of our God. And sometimes it's easy to forget that in the day-to-day events, that who are we anyways? We are so small, and God is sovereign. We could go anywhere in the Bible, and any time in history, the message is clear that God is at work accomplishing his plan. Joseph is another clear example. Joseph said, you guys meant it for evil, but God meant it for good. God had this all orchestrated, and it just all played into God's will, God's plan. Esther is just a clear example of this. So this morning, as we look at the book of Esther, I want us to see the amazing providence of God. Esther is one of the two books in the Bible that are named after a woman. The other, of course, is Ruth. It's interesting that there was a debate whether to include the book of Esther in the canon of books or not. And does anybody know the reason that Esther was debated to be included?
They thought it was fictional.
What's that? Thought it was fictional? Okay.
I don't think it mentions God.
It don't mention God. And that was one of the things. It don't mention God. And so what book in the Bible don't mention God? Well, there's another one. Who knows what the other book is that don't mention God? That one I don't know is debated. Song of Solomon. You won't find the word God in the Song of Solomon. I don't think it was debated because we understand Solomon wrote it. So yeah, it's just some interesting things about the book of Esther. And I would like to, and this is not a history class necessarily, but I think it helps to get the setting of the book of Esther if we look a little bit at a timeline here. So we're talking BC, so it might be a little confusing. We start out with a high number and we go down this way as time moves on. So in 597 BC is when Babylon came and carried Judah into captivity. So Judah was carried into captivity. You remember there was just a remnant left there. They ended up down in Egypt and they perished by the sword. Jeremiah 10 or 29:10. Jeremiah 29:10, approximately 2 years before Babylon was carried into captivity, he was in Jerusalem, and he prophesied, and he said, "For thus saith the Lord, that after 70 years be accomplished at Babylon, I will visit you and perform my good word towards you in causing you to return to this place." So Jeremiah prophesies, says, "Thus says the Lord, you're going to be there for 70 years, and then I'm going to do my work, and you're going to come back again to this land." Do we see the amazing providence of God? 70 years later, God allowed the people to come back. And not only allowed them, but Cyrus is who Jeremiah said would command them to come back. Probably the clearest one on that is in 2 Chronicles, and I just pick a few verses out here out of 2 Chronicles that say how this all came to be. 2 Chronicles chapter 36, the end of the book here. 21 to 23 says, "To fulfill the word of the Lord by the mouth of Jeremiah, until the land hath enjoyed her Sabbath, and as long as she lay desolate, she kept Sabbaths to fulfill 70 years," which is 70 years. "Now in the first year of Cyrus, king of Persia, that the word of the Lord spoken by the mouth of Jeremiah might be accomplished, the Lord stirred the spirit of Cyrus, king of Persia, and he made a proclamation throughout all the kingdom, and put it also in writing, saying, Thus saith Cyrus the king of Persia, all the kingdoms of the earth hath the Lord God of heaven given me, and he hath charged me to build him an house in Jerusalem, which is in Judah. Who is there among you of all his people? The Lord his God be with you, and let him go up." Isn't that amazing? God is just so sovereign over this. God told Jeremiah this was going to happen. Jeremiah prophesied by name, Cyrus. And Cyrus, the king of Persia, which I kind of skipped out of my order here. 539 BC is when Persia conquered Babylon. So the Babylonian army took the Judah up to Babylon, and then in 539, we remember how Belteshazzar was having a feast, and the Medes and the Persians came in and overtook Babylon. Daniel was there at the time. Daniel would have served under Nebuchadnezzar, under Belteshazzar. I don't think he was involved with Belteshazzar, but then Darius the Mede sits on the throne. So how does this all play out to Cyrus? He comes down, just the next one in line there, Darius the Mede, and Cyrus the Persian. So in 536 BC, Cyrus announces that the Jews can go back. That is after 70 years of captivity. 536 to 516, the temple is rebuilt. It takes approximately 20 years to rebuild the temple, and you can look at the books there of Ezra and see how long it took. And Haggai, Zechariah were the prophets then to keep the people going. And 486, so we're dropping down. 486 BC, Ahasuerus becomes king over 127 provinces, and that's where the book of Esther starts. In the first chapter of Esther here, we have Ahasuerus becoming king, and Ahasuerus, in 3 or 4 years later after he's king, he has a great feast. 483, King Ahasuerus has a 180-day feast to show off the majesty of his wealth and splendor in Shushan the palace. Chapter 1, verses 2 to 6 of Esther says that in those days when King Ahasuerus sat on the throne of his kingdom, which was in Shushan the palace. Shushan the palace is approximately 200 miles east of Babylon, is where he was. Some writers thought that was their winter place where they went, but I'm not sure that holds out because it's the exact place. You'll find in the book of Nehemiah, 30 years later, Nehemiah is in Shushan in the palace, and Yeah. So in the 3rd year of his reign, he made a feast unto all his princes and his servants, and the power of Persia and Media, and the nobles and the princes of the province being before him, when he showed the riches of his glorious kingdom and the honor of his excellent majesty many days, even 180 days. And when these days were expired, the king made a feast for all the people that were present in Shushan, the palace, both great and small, 7 days in the court of the garden of the king's palace, where they're white and green, and it goes on to describe the beauty of this. It was just the majesty, and King Ahasuerus wanted to show this off. But there's also another thing that comes into play here in the book of Esther is that at the height of this party, in his probably somewhat drunken state and drunken of all his men that were around there, he decides that his queen, Vashti, she also had a party going, should come in and parade her beauty before all these people. And I don't know, amazing Vashti refused, and amazing, don't read that Vashti was put to death, but Vashti refused to come in. And of course, the council of Ahasuerus, at the council of his party friends, he puts Vashti away and tries to make a statement over all the kingdom, very humiliated. So he puts this statement out that all wives are supposed to honor their husband. So history tells us that King Ahasuerus, one of the reasons of this big party was to boost his morale and get his whole army pumped up. And right after this, they headed up to Greece. And it didn't go well for him at Greece. There was a storm came up, and he lost 400 of his ships. And he went to battle, and it ended up he returned defeated. 4 years later, he's back again, and that is 478, and Esther becomes queen approximately 40 years after the temple was built. So in that time frame, they were sent back, the temple was built, and 40 years later, Esther becomes queen, and that is still 30 years before Nehemiah goes back to rebuild the walls. So over that 70-year time period, the Jews are back, the temple is built, the walls are laying in ruin, and it's in this time frame when Esther comes to be queen here. Ahasuerus dies 13 years after Esther becomes queen, and his son Artaxerxes becomes king. And that is the Artaxerxes that we see that Nehemiah was cupbearer for. So approximately 4 years after Esther is made queen, 4 or 5 years, somewhere around there, Esther saves the Jews from a massacre by divine intervention or by God's providence. It's really the heart and core of the book of Esther, redemption from a degree that could not be changed or altered. God's law could not be changed, and we need God's intervention as well. So I just like to look through the book, do a kind of a overview of the book, and just pick out a few things in chapter 2. So we'll pick out a chapter 1. Chapter 2, verses 5 to 7, is the introduction of Mordecai and Hadassah, which is Esther. Hadassah would be her Hebrew name. Esther would be her Persian name. Mordecai's, I'll read these verses this time. 2, 5 to 7 says, Now in Shushan the palace there was a certain Jew, whose name was Mordecai, the son of Jair, the son of Shimei, the son of Kish, a Benjamite, who had been carried away from Jerusalem with the captivity that had been carried away with Jeconiah, king of Judah, whom Nebuchadnezzar, the king of Babylon, had carried away. And he brought up Hadassah, that is Esther, his uncle's daughter, for she had neither father nor mother, and the maid was fair and beautiful, whom Mordecai, when her father and mother were dead, took for his own daughter. So that is the introduction to Esther. It's also the introduction to Mordecai. Mordecai, we can see, he was Benjamin, and of the tribe of Benjamin, which is also the tribe where Saul came from. And interesting enough, King Saul's father was Kish as well. So Kish was a common name in the tribe of Benjamin. Kish would have been the one that was carried away into Babylon, not Mordecai. And I think a legitimate question for us that we don't have answers in the book of Esther is, why were there still Jews in Persia? 40 years before this, they were sent back to rebuild the temple. It was his heart that the Jews go back to their own land. So I don't know why they were still in Persia. Maybe they had life easy there. I don't know. Maybe they enjoyed the riches of the land. I don't know. And it's hard to speculate, but they were there. And of course, God knew they were there. Esther is introduced as an orphan. Her father and mother were dead, so that says something. I don't know if there's anyone here that lost father and mother as a young child. Had to be some difficulties for her to go through. She was introduced as a Jew. She was a Jew, and a woman of beauty. She lost both father and mother and was raised by her cousin. And so that's kind of the introduction of Esther here in the book of Esther. And chapter 2, verse 21 to 23 is another kind of maybe hidden thing, but it came out later as something that was important. Chapter 2, God used it. In those days, in verse 21, those days while Mordecai sat in the king's gate, two of the king's chamberlains, Bigthan and Teresh, of those who kept the door, were wroth and sought to lay hands on the king of Ahasuerus. And the thing was known to Mordecai, who told him to Esther the queen, and Esther certified the king thereof in Mordecai's name. Now, you might think, well, that's a little thing. Mordecai overheard this. It's like, well, the king ought to know this. He tells Esther, Esther tells the king, and it's probably a done deal. It's probably forgotten. Forgotten by Mordecai. It was just the thing for him to do. Chapter 3, turn of events here in the book of Esther, and that is the king Ahasuerus promoted Haman, the son of Hammedatha, the Agagite, and advanced him and set his seat above all the princes that were with him. In other words, Haman was promoted. He's next to the king, right up there with the king. And it's interesting to know who this Haman was, an Agagite. What do we know about them? Did you ever hear of the king Agag? Okay, I see some heads going. King Agag is the one that King Saul brought back alive. And God said, I want you to completely destroy the Amalekites, including King Agag. And don't you know, they brought the sheep back, and they brought the king back, and Samuel ended up hewing him in pieces, destroyed him. But it was because of that disobedience that the kingship of Saul was cut off. The Amalekites were supposed to be wiped out completely, because as the children of Israel came out of Egypt, it was the Amalekites that made war against them. And God says, when you have a king, we're going to wipe out the remembrance of Amalekite completely. So that was supposed to be the annihilation of the Amalekites. You remember when Saul was wounded in battle, Saul falls on his sword, and he's begging somebody to kill him, but nobody did, so he fell on his own sword, and there's still life in him, and he sees this guy coming along and says, take my life, kill me. It was an Amalekite. Sore spot for Saul to be dying. And anyways, I couldn't say all that. Now, here an Amalekite is in power and will plot to completely annihilate the Jews. the promotion of Haman and the fury of Haman. First of all, Mordecai did not bow to Haman. And I imagine when Haman walked down the street, people bowed, they tipped their hats, they did reverence to Haman. He's a great man. And here's Mordecai. I don't know if he ignored him, smiled at him. He's not going to bow to him. And Haman was furious. And Haman says, we're going to take care of Mordecai. No, we're not. We're going to take care of all the Jews. That's what we'll do. We'll destroy all the Jews. So it's interesting here again, God's providence. In chapter 3, verse 7 says, in the first month, that is the month Nisan, in the 12th year of King Ahasuerus, they cast pur, and that is the lot, before Haman from day to day and month to month, to the 12th month, that is the month Adar. So what they did, they probably rolled some dice, and whatever dice is going to be the day and the month that this is going to be carried out. And in God's providence, he pushed it down 11 months down the road is when this is going to be carried out. And as I studied that, it comes very close to the Passover, not exactly according to, we don't know if there's some years missing or times exactly the same, but he cast lot, approximately 11 months. And the interesting thing that I found in Wilmington's Guide to the Bible, the date was calculated to be February 23. Today's February 23. That's the day the lot rolled on us. Okay, God, I know your providence is for real, but was I supposed to preach this message today? Is it in fact February 23? And maybe it was, when they were to be annihilated. And so Haman's plot, of course, his idea is to destroy all the Jews. And chapter 3, verses 8 to 10 is kind of one of these things that are kind of like unbelievable. Here's a king in all his majesty and power and everything. Haman comes in, says, and Haman said unto King Ahasuerus, there is a certain people scattered abroad and dispersed among the people in all the province of thy kingdom. Their laws are diverse from all people, neither keep they the king's laws. Therefore it is not for the king's profit to suffer them. And if it please the king, let it be written that they may be destroyed, and I will pay 10,000 talents of silver to the king, to the hands of those that have the charge of the business, to bring it into the king's treasuries. The king took off his ring from his hand and gave it unto Haman, the son of Hammedatha, the Agagite, the Jews' enemy. And the king said unto Haman, the silver is given unto thee, the people also do with them as seemeth good to thee. Yeah. And we look at that and we say, where was God's providence then? Why didn't God stop this wicked plot then? But our picture, our vision is so small. God had a bigger vision in mind. Some of the things that seem so hard to us, it's just a small part in God's story. King gives the ring, it's signed, a decree goes out. Chapter 4, Mordecai calls for Esther to intercede for her people. And Esther's like, don't you know, Mordecai, this king has very little regard for life. My life won't be any different than anybody else's. If I go in and he don't hold out that scepter, there's one degree, and that's death. Esther, I can't go in. I wasn't called for 30 days. I can't go in before the king. Mordecai's faith in God to send a deliverer is incredible. In chapter 4, verses 13 and 14, some highlight verses of the book. Then Mordecai commanded to answer Esther, think not with thyself that thou shalt escape in the king's house more than all the Jews. For if thou altogether holdest thy peace at this time, then shall their enlargement and deliverance arise to the Jews from another place. But thou and thy father's house shall be desolate, destroyed. And who knoweth whether thou art come to the kingdom for such a time as this? Just amazing. The faith of Mordecai and saying, if I can see God's picture, there's a chance that you're here for this very reason. Now, I told you Esther was chosen to be queen. And I was kind of struck by a new thought as I studied this book that Barb actually went through. This was not an elevated position. Esther was chosen, but she was in the pool. So in the pool, we don't know how many hundreds or even thousands of beautiful young women, virgins, were there that went through and spent a night with the king, and if they were rejected, there was no marriage for them. They were in the king's harem. This was not a thing where people were campaigning for it. This is a thing that God had his hands in. God took her down this road. Yeah, it was her beauty that was noticed, but it was something more than that. I think Ahasuerus noticed her spirit and chose her to be queen. God's providence. Esther's response reveals her faith in God. 3 days of fasting, and she'll lay down her life for her people. She says, call everybody everywhere. Fast for 3 days, and I'll go in. And if I perish, I perish. What a tremendous attitude in the providence of God. I'm going to do it. If I perish, I perish. Chapter 5. And I'm not sure. We went through a lot of years, but somehow the time here this morning has just evaporated. Esther standing in the inner court in front of the king, ready to intervene. And we have Esther doing her part. She's dressed in her royal apparel. She stands before the king, and the king looks at her. Amazing. Hasn't called her for 30 days. His face lights up. It's Esther. He holds out his signet. She comes in. She touches the signet there. And the king says, what wilt thou, Queen Esther, and what is thy request? And again, I can't imagine except the Spirit of God at work in Esther's heart. Esther says, can you and Haman come to a banquet? Sure, this king is all about parties, all about banquets. So Esther throws a banquet there, and the king and Haman come. Esther had a plan, but why 2 banquets? I don't know why 2 banquets. So that day, Esther did not tell Ahasuerus. He says, what's your request? I'll give to you half the kingdom. Esther says, this is my request. If I have found favor in your sight, this is my request. Come to a banquet tomorrow, and I'll tell you. Okay, king says, great. Second banquet of wine, and Haman also. And of course, it sat well with Haman. And Haman goes home, and he tells of all his riches. He brags to his wife and his friends how he has all this glory and all these riches. And yeah, there's one thing that wears on me. That's that Mordecai. I can't handle it. He don't respect me. Look who I am. He should bow to me. He don't bow to me. And of course, Zeresh, his wife, and their friends, they all together counsel Haman, build a gallows, 50 cubits high, 50 cubits, 75 feet high, to hang a 6-foot man on? Whew. I guess we want to put him way up and hang Mordecai on. So the gallows is built. And that very night, Ahasuerus couldn't sleep. I don't know if it was the pounding of the gallows that kept him awake or not, but I have a feeling it was God at work. God did not allow him to sleep. That's the providence of God. There's something we need to take from this message this morning is we serve the same God. God can keep you all up awake at night. God can give you sleep at night. It's the same God. And God is at work. And the books are brought. What in the world, did you ever bring out your diaries and read them when you couldn't sleep? Oh, interesting. Mordecai wasn't rewarded for this. Oh, he would have honor. And as this is amazing time, Ahasuerus looks up. Oh, somebody's in the court. Who's in the court? Oh, Haman. Oh, great. Haman, what shall we do to a man the king wants to honor? And Haman says, you can just see pride at work. It's all over him. It's me. Tell you what, the king's clothes, the king's crown, the king's horse, have the most noble servant go before me and proclaim, this is what shall be done to the king, whom the king wants to honor. And you can see the picture here. I don't know what Haman's face looked like. I imagine it was glowing and beaming, and he's imagined sitting on this horse, and he's going down the street. Who's going to lead it? Who's going to holler it out? Yeah. Do it. Everything. Don't leave out a thing. Do it to Mordecai the Jew. Wow. Isn't that incredible the way God is at work? God will bring the humble down. Or the proud down. He will exalt the humble. So that is carried out. Haman don't have time anymore. He hurries home. He tells his wife and his family what happened. And you know what? They knew about the greatness of God. And Zerubbabel's wife said, if he's a Jew and you are going against his God, you will not prevail. And that quick, they're there. They haul him off to the banquet. And the king says the third time, Esther, what do you want? And she plead, and obviously we don't have time to go into this. You should read it. She simply humbly pleads. She said, if we would have been sold for bondservants, I'd hold my peace. But since we are sold to be destroyed and to be killed, I'm begging for my life. And the king's like, what? Who is this? Where is he? Esther says, well, is this Haman right here, this wicked Haman. King is furious. And I imagine the king walked out of there in his summer garden just furious at Haman and furious at himself. He signed a decree that cannot be changed. Isn't that the same as Darius? Darius didn't sleep either when he signed that decree that nobody worships anybody but him. And Daniel is in the lion's den. Same thing, law of the Medes and Persians, which cannot be changed. So as the story goes, Haman is hung on the very gallows that he prepared for Mordecai. Mordecai is promoted, and he is very great in the land. He sends out the king signs letters to allow the Jews to retaliate, those that will come at them to kill them that same day. And the Jews were, I wish I had some more time here, but the Jews overpowered them, and many of the princes sided with the Jews on that day. They saw the power of God at work. It's just an amazing story, how God intervened and the providence of God. The Jews defend themselves. The Feast of Purim is set for generations to remember how God delivered them. And March 13 and 14 of this year are the dates for the Feast of Purim. I want us to think about that and think about God at work in our lives and how God does deliver us and how God did deliver us. This was a type of how God has an irrevocable law that says, in the day you eat thereof, you shall surely die. We are under that law. Every one of us is under that law. But God sent a Redeemer. God sent a Redeemer. And I think our Sunday school lesson ties right in with our obligations. Will we lay down our lives for multitudes of people that maybe haven't heard? But let's be faithful. God has a big plan. We know what that plan is. That plan is for all men to be saved, all men to come to the saving knowledge of Jesus Christ, to be with him in eternity. We're not there yet. We have a lot of work to do. But let's be faithful, and let's not become discouraged when it looks like God is not in control. God is in control. Let's kneel before the Lord in prayer.